I remember the exact moment I understood that love is not a gentle thing, but a blade disguised as light, slipping between your ribs before you realize you are bleeding. It was the night I spoke a single word to the most powerful man in England and watched his laughter die in his throat as he stared at the chessboard between us, realizing that the invisible girl who scrubbed his floors had just dismantled his defenses in 17 moves. My name, the one I was born with, is Eleanor Catherine Ashford, daughter of the late Earl of Whitmore, a man who taught me that a woman's mind is her greatest weapon and her most dangerous secret. But by the time I arrived at Ashworth Hall in the winter of my 19th year, I had buried that name along with my father, wrapped it in silence, and hidden it beneath the plain gray dress of a housemaid. The world believed Eleanor Ashford had vanished into obscurity after her family's ruin, perhaps dead, perhaps fled to some distant relative on the continent. In truth, she had simply become Nell, a quiet girl with downcast eyes and capable hands, unremarkable in every way that mattered to those who never truly looked. I had learned early that invisibility is a form of survival. When my father's investments crumbled and the creditors descended like crows upon carrion, I watched everything I knew dissolve into auction notices and whispered scandals. The house where I had learned to read, to dance, to play chess by candlelight with a father who treated me as an equal rather than an ornament, was sold to a merchant who had no use for the library. My mother had died giving birth to me, so there was no one to shield me when my father followed her into the grave 6 months after our ruin, his heart broken not by poverty but by shame. I was alone in a world that had no place for a gentlewoman without fortune, without connections, without the protection of a name that still commanded respect. The agency that placed me at Ashworth Hall asked few questions. They needed girls who could work hard and speak little, and I was desperate enough to become exactly that. I told them my name was Nell Blackwood, that I was the orphaned daughter of a country vicar, that I could read and write but had no pretensions above my station. They believed me because they wanted to believe me, because the alternative, that a lady might fall so far as to scrub floors beside common girls, was too uncomfortable to contemplate. Ashworth Hall was a monument to power and grief. A sprawling estate in the heart of Northumberland where the wind carried whispers of old sorrows across the moors. The house itself was beautiful in the way that a mausoleum is beautiful, all cold marble and heavy portraits and rooms that seemed to hold their breath. I arrived on a gray November morning, my single trunk containing everything I owned in the world, and I remember thinking that the house looked exactly like its master felt, according to the gossip I had heard in the servants' quarters of my previous position. Frozen, impenetrable, waiting for something that would never come. The Duke of Ashworth was a legend among servants, the kind of master who inspired fear rather than affection. Lord Sebastian Ashworth had inherited his title at 22, married brilliantly at 24, and become a widower at 30, when his wife died in circumstances that no one discussed openly but everyone discussed in whispers. Now, at 35, he was known throughout England as the Cold Duke, a man whose fortune was exceeded only by his reputation for mercilessness in business and his complete indifference to the society that courted his favor. He attended no balls, accepted no invitations, entertained no guests, except when absolutely required by duty. The great house that should have rung with the laughter of children and the music of parties stood silent, its master prowling its halls like a ghost who had not yet realized he was dead. I did not expect to ever speak to him. Housemaids did not speak to dukes. We existed in parallel worlds that occasionally intersected in the form of cleaned hearths and polished silver, but never in the form of words or acknowledgement. I was assigned to the East Wing, a section of the house that included the library, the study, and a series of private rooms that the Duke used when he wished to escape the grander spaces where his wife's presence still lingered in the wallpaper and the arrangement of furniture that no one dared change. I cleaned his fireplace before dawn, dusted his books while he breakfasted elsewhere, changed his linens while he rode across the estate on a black horse that matched his reputation. I saw him occasionally, a tall figure in dark clothing, his face handsome in a severe way that reminded me of the marble statues in my father's garden, beautiful but cold, shaped by an artist who understood form but had never felt warmth. For 3 months, I was nothing to him, less than nothing. I was a function rather than a person, a pair of hands that ensured his comfort without ever intruding upon his consciousness. And I was grateful for that invisibility, because it meant safety, it meant anonymity, it meant that no one would ever look closely enough to see the education behind my eyes or the refinement I had to consciously suppress in my speech and bearing. I had become skilled at making myself small, at folding away everything that made me Eleanor and presenting only Nell, the good girl, the quiet girl, the girl who wanted nothing and expected nothing and would never, ever presume. The library was my secret torment and my secret joy. It was the finest private collection I had ever seen, rivaling even the one my father had assembled before our ruin. Volumes in Latin and Greek, French and German, treatises on philosophy and science, poetry that made my heart ache with recognition. I dusted those books with hands that longed to open them, that remembered the weight of knowledge and the pleasure of ideas. Sometimes, when I was certain I was alone, I would allow myself to read a page, just one page, standing in the gray morning light with my feather duster forgotten, drinking words like water after a drought. And there was the chessboard. It sat on a table by the window in the library, a beautiful thing made of ebony and ivory, the pieces carved with exquisite detail. The Duke played against himself, I learned from the other servants, working through problems and strategies in the late hours when sleep eluded him. He was said to be brilliant at the game, undefeated by any opponent who had dared to challenge him, though few dared any more because losing to the cold Duke was an exercise in humiliation. He played without mercy, without the social grace of allowing a lesser opponent to save face. He played to win, always, and he always did. I watched the board change from day to day, tracking his solitary games as I went about my invisible work. At first, I only observed, noting his strategies with the part of my mind that my father had trained to see patterns and anticipate consequences. But then I began to notice things, small errors, moments where he had chosen the obvious move rather than the elegant one, positions where he had failed to see a deeper strategy that would have ended the game 3 moves sooner. I told myself it was not my place to judge, that I was a housemaid and he was a duke, and the distance between us was measured not in feet, but in the entire structure of the world. But the errors gnawed at me, the way a misplaced word in a sentence gnaws at a writer, the wrongness of it an itch I could not scratch. The night everything changed, I had been at Ashworth Hall for nearly 4 months. It was February, the coldest month, and I had been assigned to bank the library fire late in the evening because the regular girl had fallen ill. I performed my duties quickly, efficiently, expecting the room to be empty as it usually was at that hour. But as I turned to leave, my eyes fell upon the chessboard, and I stopped. He had left a game in progress, white against black, and white was in trouble. I could see immediately what he had failed to see, that black's position, his position when he played against himself, contained a flaw that could be exploited in 4 moves to achieve a checkmate that he had clearly not anticipated. The white queen was vulnerable, the black knight was positioned to devastate, and yet the move he had made before abandoning the game for the evening had ignored all of this in favor of a conservative defense that would only prolong the inevitable. I should have walked away. Every instinct of self-preservation, every lesson I had learned in the harsh months since my fall from grace, screamed at me to leave the board untouched and return to my attic room where I belonged. But my hand moved before my mind could stop it, reaching out to the white bishop, sliding it across the board to a square that changed everything. From that position, the entire game shifted. Black's advantage crumbled. The checkmate I had seen became impossible, and a new path opened. one that would allow white to not only survive, but triumph. I did not hear him enter. I did not know he was there until his voice cut through the silence like a blade through silk, low and cold and dangerous. "What do you think you are doing?" I spun around, my heart stopping in my chest. He stood in the doorway, still dressed in his evening clothes, a glass of brandy in his hand and an expression on his face that I could not read. He was taller than I had realized, broader in the shoulders, and his eyes, I had never been close enough to see his eyes before, were the color of winter storms, gray and dark and full of something that might have been anger or might have been something else entirely. I dropped into the lowest curtsy my trembling legs could manage, my gaze fixed on the floor, my voice barely a whisper. "Forgive me, Your Grace. I did not mean to. I beg your pardon. I will go at once. Stay." The word was a command, not a request. I remained frozen in my curtsy, waiting for the dismissal that would surely follow, the fury, the termination of my employment without reference. I had been stupid, reckless, and now I would pay the price. "Look at me." I raised my eyes slowly, reluctantly, and found him studying me with an intensity that made me feel as though he could see through my plain gray dress to the secrets I carried beneath it. He crossed the room in silence, his steps measured, and stopped beside the chessboard, looking down at the position I had altered. "You move the bishop," he said. "Yes, Your Grace." "Why?" I swallowed hard, searching for a lie that would make sense, that would explain why a housemaid would presume to touch the Duke of Ashworth's chess pieces. But no lie came, only the truth, tumbling out of my mouth before I could stop it. "Because you were going to lose." Silence. A silence so complete that I could hear the fire cracking in the hearth and the wind howling against the windows and the blood rushing in my ears. Then, impossibly, he laughed. It was not a warm laugh, not a kind laugh, but it was a laugh nonetheless, a sound that the servants claimed he never made. "You think you can see what I cannot," he said, amusement threading through the coldness of his voice. "You, a housemaid, presumed to tell me that I was going to lose at my own game." I should have apologized. I should have prostrated myself and begged for mercy. But something in his condescension sparked a flame in me that I had thought extinguished, a pride I could not afford, a dignity I had buried with my father. "I do not presume, Your Grace. I observe. Black had a checkmate in 4 moves. You did not see it. I did." His laughter stopped. He looked at the board again, his brow furrowing, and I watched as he traced the moves in his mind, as the realization dawned on his face that I was right. When he looked at me again, the amusement was gone, replaced by something far more dangerous. "Show me," he said. "Your Grace, show me the checkmate you claim to have seen." My hands were shaking as I approached the board, intensely aware of his proximity, of the impropriety of standing so close to him, of the madness of what I was doing. I returned the pieces to their previous positions before my interference, and then I began to move them, narrating softly as I did. Knight to f3. You would have moved your queen to defend because that is the obvious choice. Then bishop to c5, threatening your rook. You would have to address that threat, which means your queen moves again. Then knight to e4, and your king has nowhere to go. Checkmate. I stepped back, my heart pounding, and waited for his verdict. He stared at the board for a long moment, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. Then he swept the pieces aside with one hand, resetting them to their starting positions, and fixed me with those storm-gray eyes. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "Your Grace, I cannot. I am not asking." "Sit." I sat. What else could I do? He was the Duke of Ashworth, and I was a housemaid in his employ, and when a duke commands, a servant obeys, even when the command makes no sense, even when it violates every rule of propriety and station that governs their respective worlds. He took the chair across from me, and for a moment we simply stared at each other across the ivory and ebony battlefield. Then he made his opening move. "Play," he said. So I played. I do not know how long that first game lasted. Time ceased to have meaning as we moved our pieces in silence, as strategies formed and dissolved and reformed, as I realized with growing astonishment that I was not losing. I was not winning either, not yet, but I was holding my own against a man who had defeated every opponent who had ever faced him, and I could see in the subtle tension of his shoulders and the focus in his eyes that he knew it too. When I finally saw the opening, I did not hesitate. I moved my queen into position, and I spoke the word that would change everything. Checkmate. He laughed again, that same cold, disbelieving sound, certain that I had made a mistake, that I had misspoken, that a housemaid could not possibly have bested him at his own game. But then he looked at the board, truly looked, and the laughter died in his throat. His face went pale. His hands, which had been reaching for his king as if to prove me wrong, froze in midair. I watched him examine every possible escape, every potential counter, every avenue of survival. I watched him realize, piece by piece, move by move, that there was none. I had trapped him so thoroughly that even his brilliant mind could find no way out. When he finally looked up at me, I expected anger. I expected humiliation transmuted into fury, the rage of a powerful man brought low by someone he considered beneath him. I braced myself for dismissal, for retribution, for the end of everything I had built in these months of careful invisibility. But what I saw in his eyes was not anger, it was wonder. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I am no one, Your Grace, just a housemaid." "No," he said, "you are not." He leaned back in his chair, studying me as if I were a puzzle he could not solve, a cipher written in a language he had never encountered. The fire crackled beside us, casting dancing shadows across his face, and in that light he looked almost human, almost warm, almost like a man who had once known how to feel something other than cold. "A housemaid does not play chess like that," he said. "A housemaid does not see 4 moves ahead of a duke who has studied the game since childhood. A housemaid does not speak with that accent, does not hold herself with that posture, does not look at a man with eyes that expect to be treated as an equal. So I ask again, who are you?" I should have lied. I should have invented some story about a kind employer who had taught me, a governess position I had held before falling on hard times, anything that would explain my abilities without revealing my identity. But I was tired. Tired of pretending, tired of hiding, tired of being invisible in a world that had once seen me as someone worthy of notice. And there was something in his gaze, some hunger for truth that mirrored my own hunger to speak it, that loosened my tongue against all wisdom. I was not always a housemaid, I said. I was not always no one. He waited, patient as a predator, watching me with those storm-colored eyes. "My father," I continued, my voice catching on the word, "believed that a woman's mind was no different from a man's. He taught me languages and philosophy and mathematics. He taught me to play chess. He taught me to think, to analyze, to see the world as a series of problems to be solved rather than mysteries to be accepted. And when he died, when everything we had was taken from us, I had to find a way to survive. This was the only way I knew." He was silent for a long moment, processing my words, fitting them into some internal framework I could not see. "Your father," he said finally. "Who was he?" I met his eyes, knowing that the truth would end whatever strange truce we had stumbled into, that he would dismiss me once he knew that the daughter of a ruined earl had no place scrubbing floors in a duke's mansion. "The Earl of Whitmore," I said. I watched recognition flicker across his face. Of course he knew the name. Everyone in society knew the name or had known it. Before scandal and bankruptcy had erased us from collective memory, the Whitmore fortune had been legendary, and its collapse had been the subject of endless gossip for months. Eleanor Ashford, he said, and hearing my true name on his lips was like being struck by lightning, like waking from a dream I had not realized I was having. You are Eleanor Ashford. I remember you. We met once at a ball, years ago. You were 17. You wore a blue dress, and you argued with me about trade policy, and I thought you were the most irritating girl I had ever met. Despite everything, despite the danger of my revealed identity, despite the impossibility of my situation, I felt the ghost of a smile cross my face. And I thought you were the most arrogant man I had ever met, I said. It seems neither of us has changed very much. Something shifted in his expression then. Something that might have been amusement, or might have been respect, or might have been something else entirely. Something that I would not allow myself to name, because naming it would make it real, and real things could be lost. You should not be here, he said. You should not be scrubbing my floors and cleaning my fireplace. You were raised to be a lady. I was raised to survive, I corrected him, and this is how I survive. I did not ask for your pity, Your Grace, and I do not want it. I only ask that you allow me to continue in my position and that you keep my secret. I have nowhere else to go. He rose from his chair and walked to the window, staring out at the darkness that pressed against the glass. I watched the line of his back, the tension in his shoulders, and I waited for the verdict that would determine my fate. Tomorrow night, he said without turning around, same time, same place. We will play again. Your Grace, you heard me. Now go to bed, Miss Ashford. You have work to do in the morning. I fled the library on trembling legs, not understanding what had just happened, not knowing what it meant. I only knew that I had revealed everything, that my secret was in the hands of a man known for his cruelty and his coldness, and that instead of destroying me, he had asked me to play chess with him again. That night, I did not sleep. I lay in my narrow bed in the servants' attic, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our encounter. I told myself that it meant nothing, that he was simply curious, that once his curiosity was satisfied, he would dismiss me like he had dismissed everyone else who had ever tried to get close to him. I told myself that I was a fool for revealing the truth, that I had handed him a weapon he could use against me at any moment, that I was at his mercy in a way I had never been before. But beneath all the fear and recrimination, there was something else. A spark, small but unmistakable, that had nothing to do with chess and everything to do with the way he had looked at me when I had said checkmate. As if he were seeing me for the first time. As if, for one moment, I had been real to him in a way that no one had been real in years. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself it would pass. I was wrong. The next night, I went to the library at the appointed hour, half convinced that I had imagined the entire encounter, that he would not be there, that my duties as a housemaid would resume as if nothing had changed. But he was waiting for me, seated at the chess table, the pieces already arranged. Sit, he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, as if dukes and housemaids played chess together every night. I sat, and we played. This time, he won. Barely, by the slimmest of margins, through a strategy so complex and beautiful that I could not help but admire it even as it destroyed me. When it was over, he leaned back in his chair with something that might have been satisfaction. Better, he said. You cheated. I employed misdirection. There is a difference measured in semantics. His lips twitched. It was not a smile, not quite, but it was close enough that I felt something flutter in my chest, something dangerous and unwelcome. Tomorrow night, he said. Same time. And so it began. Night after night, we met in the library while the rest of the house slept. Night after night, we battled across the chessboard, two minds testing each other, pushing each other, finding in each other a challenge that neither of us had encountered anywhere else. We spoke little at first, only the necessary words of the game, the declarations of check and mate, the occasional observation about strategy or tactics. But gradually, imperceptibly, the silences between moves began to fill with other things. He asked me about my father, and I told him. I told him about the library at Whitmore House, about the Sunday afternoons when we would play chess and discuss philosophy, about the way my father's eyes would light up when I made a particularly clever argument. I told him about my mother, who I had never known, and about the miniature portrait my father kept by his bedside, and about how I used to talk to her sometimes, telling her about my day, imagining her responses. I told him about the collapse, about the creditors and the auctions, and the terrible day when I had stood in an empty house that no longer belonged to us, surrounded by rectangles of unfaded wallpaper where paintings used to hang. He listened without interruption, without judgment, and when I was finished, he told me about his wife. Her name was Catherine, he said, his voice stripped of its usual coldness, exposing something raw beneath. We met when I was 23. She was beautiful and kind and gentle, everything I was not. I thought I could learn to be better, with her. I thought she could teach me how to feel. What happened? I asked, and instantly regretted it, because the pain that crossed his face was so naked, so devastating, that I wanted to take the words back and swallow them. She died, he said, in childbirth. The baby died too. A boy. We were going to name him Edward, after my father. I am sorry. Do not be. It was 5 years ago. I have made my peace with it, but he had not. I could see it in the way he gripped the chess piece in his hand, white-knuckled, as if letting go would mean losing her all over again. I could see it in the shadows under his eyes, in the way he haunted this house like a ghost, in the way he had walled himself off from any possibility of feeling, because feeling meant hurting, and hurting meant being destroyed. I understood that. I understood it more than he knew. The weeks passed, winter slowly releasing its grip as spring crept across the moors. Our midnight games continued, and with each one, the walls between us grew thinner. I learned that he hated social obligations, not out of snobbery, but out of exhaustion, that every ball and dinner party felt like a performance in which he had to play the role of the cold duke because the alternative, being human, being vulnerable, was too terrifying to contemplate. I learned that he read poetry in secret, that his favorite was Byron, that he had once written verses himself, but had burned them after Catherine died because they felt like lies. I learned that he was terrified of becoming his father, a man known for his cruelty and his coldness, and that his greatest fear was that he had already become him, that the mask he wore had fused with his face until there was nothing else left. And he learned about me, about my dreams of someday having a home again, not a grand estate, but a small cottage, perhaps, with a garden where I could grow roses and a library where I could keep the few books I had managed to save from the wreckage of my father's collection. About my fear that I would spend the rest of my life invisible, serving in the houses of people who would never see me as a person, never know that I had once been someone, never understand that beneath the plain gray dress was a woman with thoughts and feelings and desires that she had learned to suppress but could never fully extinguish. About my mother, whom I missed despite never knowing her, and about the conversations I still had with her sometimes, late at night, when the loneliness became unbearable. He never pitied me. That was what made him different from everyone else. He never looked at me with that terrible sympathy that the charitable bestow upon the fallen, that subtle condescension dressed up as compassion. He looked at me as an equal, as an opponent, as someone worthy of his attention and his respect. And somewhere in those midnight hours, between moves and countermoves, strategies and sacrifices, I began to feel something that I had not allowed myself to feel in years. I began to hope. It was dangerous, that hope. I knew it was dangerous. He was a duke, and I was a housemaid, and no matter what my birth had been, my present reality was one of servitude and silence. The world would never accept us as anything other than master and servant. Society would destroy any attempt at something more. And yet, when he looked at me across the chessboard, when his fingers brushed mine as he reached for a piece at the same moment I did, when he laughed, truly laughed, at something I said, and I saw the man beneath the marble facade, I could not help but wonder, what if? What if the rules could be rewritten? What if the game could be played differently? What if a housemaid and a duke could find in each other something that transcended the boundaries of class and convention and everything the world said was possible? I did not speak these thoughts aloud. I was not that foolish, but I carried them with me, secret and precious, a flame I cupped in my hands against the wind. The complications came, as I had always known they would, in the form of a house guest. Her name was Lady Arabella Morton, and she arrived at Ashworth Hall on a bright April morning with an entourage of servants, a mountain of trunks, and a smile that did not reach her eyes. She was the daughter of an earl, a widow herself, and according to the gossip that spread through the servants' quarters like wildfire, she had been Catherine's closest friend. She has come to claim him, Mrs. Patterson, the housekeeper, told us with grim certainty. Mark my words, that woman has had her eye on the Duke since before his wife was cold in the ground. Now that her own mourning period is over, she means to become the next Duchess of Ashworth. I tried not to let the words affect me. I tried to remind myself that I had no claim on him, no right to jealousy, no reason to feel the cold knot that formed in my stomach when I saw Lady Arabella take his arm at dinner, when I heard her tinkling laughter echoing through the halls, when I observed the way she leaned close to him and whispered in his ear with an intimacy that spoke of long acquaintance and perhaps something more. But it affected me. Of course it affected me. I was in love with him. The realization came to me in the quiet of my attic room, in the hour before dawn when sleep refused to come. I loved Sebastian Ashworth. I loved his brilliant mind and his wounded heart. I loved the way he looked at me as if I mattered, as if my thoughts were worth hearing, as if my existence was something more than an inconvenience to be tolerated. I loved the rare glimpses of humor that broke through his cold facade and the vulnerability that he showed only in the darkness of the library, only to me. I loved him, and the love was impossible, and the impossibility was a blade that cut deeper with every passing day. Lady Arabella's presence changed everything. Our midnight games became sporadic, interrupted by the social obligations that the Duke could no longer avoid. When we did meet, the conversations were different, strained, weighted with things neither of us would say. I could feel him pulling away, retreating behind his walls, and I did not know if it was because of Lady Arabella or because of something else. Some realization that what we were doing was inappropriate. Some decision to end whatever had been growing between us before it could grow any further. And then came the night that destroyed everything. I was in the library, alone, having waited for an hour past our usual meeting time. He was not coming. He was probably with Lady Arabella in one of the grand drawing rooms, being charming in the way that society demanded, playing the role of the eligible widower, considering his options. I should have left, should have returned to my room and my narrow bed and my narrow life, but I could not bring myself to move. Instead, I sat at the chess table, running my fingers over the pieces, remembering. I did not hear the door open. I did not know anyone was there until a voice, sharp and cold and feminine, cut through my reverie. Well, well, what have we here? I leaped to my feet, my heart hammering. Lady Arabella stood in the doorway, a candle in her hand, her beautiful face twisted with something that might have been triumph. "I know you," she said, advancing into the room. "I thought I recognized you when I arrived, but I could not place you. A housemaid with your bearing, with your way of speaking, with those eyes. It nagged at me for days. And then tonight, it came to me. 'Lady Arabella,' I began, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand. 'Eleanor Ashford, the Earl of Whitmore's daughter. I attended your coming-out ball, you know. You wore blue silk, and you danced 3 dances with the Duke of Ashworth himself, which was considered quite the scandal at the time, given that he had just announced his engagement to Catherine. Everyone said you had thrown yourself at him. Everyone said you were heartbroken when he married her. I was not, I said, my voice steady despite the terror that gripped me. I barely knew him then. We argued about politics. That was all. Was it? She circled me like a cat circling a mouse, her eyes glittering with malice. Then why are you here, in his library, at midnight, playing with his chess pieces? What exactly is your relationship with the Duke, Miss Ashford? I have no relationship with the Duke. I am a housemaid in his employ. Nothing more. Liar. The word hung in the air between us, sharp and dangerous. I have seen the way he looks at you, Lady Arabella continued. I have seen the way he withdraws from company when you are in the room, the way his eyes follow you when you move. At first I thought I was imagining it, projecting my own suspicions onto innocent interactions. But then I remembered who you were, and everything made sense. Nothing is happening between us. I swear it. Then you will not mind if I tell everyone who you really are. She smiled, a terrible smile, full of teeth. The ruined earl's daughter, masquerading as a servant in the house of a duke. The scandal will be delicious. The newspapers will feast on it for weeks, and Sebastian will have no choice but to dismiss you, to distance himself from the impropriety. He cannot afford the association. Not if he wishes to maintain his position in society. My hands were shaking. My whole body was shaking. I had known this moment would come, had feared it since the first night I had touched his chess pieces, but I had allowed myself to believe that it might not, that I might escape, that I might find some path through the minefield that did not end in destruction. Please, I said, and the word tasted like ashes in my mouth. Please do not do this. I will leave. Tonight, if you wish, I will disappear, and no one will ever know. Just please, do not expose me. Lady Arabella tilted her head, considering. Leave tonight, she said, without saying goodbye to him, without explanation, and I will keep your secret. I nodded, unable to speak. Good. She turned to go, then paused at the doorway, looking back over her shoulder. He would never have chosen you anyway, you know. Whatever you imagined was between you, it was fantasy. Sebastian Ashworth will marry me. It was always going to be me. Catherine knew it, I know it, and now you know it too. She left, taking her candle with her, leaving me alone in the darkness. I stood there for a long time, frozen, unable to move, unable to think. Then, slowly, mechanically, I returned to my room. I packed my single trunk. I wrote a letter to Mrs. Patterson, explaining that a family emergency required my immediate departure, apologizing for the lack of notice. I did not write a letter to him. What would I have said? That I loved him, that I was leaving to protect him, that I hoped he would be happy with Lady Arabella, even though the thought of them together made me want to scream. I took nothing that was not mine. I left the few coins I was owed on my pillow, unwilling to take even that much from the household. And in the gray hour before dawn, I slipped out the servants' entrance and began to walk. I did not know where I was going. I had no plan, no resources, no prospects. I knew only that I had to get away, had to put as much distance as possible between myself and Ashworth Hall, before Lady Arabella realized I had kept my word and before Sebastian could discover my absence. I had walked perhaps 2 miles when I heard the hoofbeats. I did not turn around. I did not need to. I knew the sound of that particular horse, that particular rider, the way I knew my own heartbeat. I kept walking, my trunk growing heavier with every step, my legs aching, my eyes burning with tears I refused to shed. Eleanor, my name, my true name, spoken in his voice, raw with something I could not identify. Eleanor, stop, please. I stopped, not because I wanted to, but because my body refused to obey my mind's commands. Because some treacherous part of me had been waiting for this, hoping for this, even as my rational mind had been preparing for goodbye. He dismounted and walked toward me, his boots crunching on the frozen ground. I could not look at him. I could not bear to see his face, to read the anger or the disappointment or the betrayal that must be written there. "You left," he said, without a word. "I woke to find you gone. And I thought—" He stopped, his voice breaking. "Why?" he asked. "Why did you leave?" "Because I had to. That is not an answer. It is the only answer I have." His hand closed around my arm, gentle but insistent, turning me to face him. I kept my eyes on the ground, on the frost-rimed grass, on anywhere but his face. "Look at me," he said. "Eleanor, look at me." I looked. And what I saw undid me. He looked destroyed. His hair was disheveled, his cravat hastily tied, his eyes red-rimmed as if he had not slept. This was not the cold duke, the marble statue, the man who felt nothing. This was a man in pain, and the pain was because of me. "Lady Arabella," I whispered. She recognized me. She threatened to expose me if I did not leave immediately. I could not let that happen. I could not let the scandal touch you. Lady Arabella can go to hell. The words were so unexpected, so violent, that I flinched. "I do not care about scandal," he continued, his voice fierce. "I do not care about society or reputation or anything else that woman could threaten me with. I care about you. I care that I woke this morning and you were gone, and I thought I had lost you forever. You cannot mean that. I mean every word. We are impossible. You are a duke. I am a ruined earl's daughter who scrubs floors for a living. The world will never accept us. Then the world can burn." He pulled me toward him, and I let him, too exhausted to resist, too desperate for his warmth to pretend I did not want it. His arms wrapped around me, holding me as if I were something precious, something worth keeping, and I buried my face in his chest and finally allowed myself to cry. "I love you," he said, the words muffled against my hair. "I have loved you since the night you beat me at chess and looked at me as if I were an equal rather than a title. I have loved you through every midnight conversation, every game, every moment of your presence that made this tomb of a house feel like somewhere worth living. I was afraid to tell you. I was afraid that if I spoke the words aloud, they would destroy everything. But I am more afraid of losing you. I am more afraid of a life without you in it. So I am telling you now, Eleanor Catherine Ashford, I love you, and I am asking you, begging you to come back." "I cannot," I said. "Lady Arabella will expose me. Your reputation will be destroyed. Everything you have built." "I have built nothing worth keeping," he interrupted. "I have a title and an estate and more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, and none of it means anything. None of it makes me happy. You make me happy. You make me feel alive for the first time in 5 years. And if the price of that is scandal, then so be it. Let them talk. Let them whisper. Let them call me mad and improper and a disgrace to my station. I do not care. I only care about you." I pulled back, searching his face for any sign of doubt, any hint that he did not truly mean what he was saying. But there was nothing there except sincerity and hope, and something that looked like love. "What about Lady Arabella?" I asked. "Lady Arabella is on her way back to London," he said. "I informed her this morning that her presence was no longer welcome at Ashworth Hall. When she protested, I told her that if she spread any rumors about you, about us, I would make it my personal mission to destroy her, financially, socially, completely. She believed me. She left within the hour. You threatened an earl's daughter. I would threaten the queen herself if she tried to take you from me." I laughed. I could not help it. The absurdity of the situation, the impossibility of it all, the sheer mad recklessness of this man who had spent 5 years hiding behind walls of ice, now declaring himself willing to burn the world for a housemaid who had beaten him at chess. It was ridiculous. It was wonderful. It was everything I had ever wanted and never dared to hope for. "Come back with me," he said. "Not as a servant, never again as a servant. Come back as my guest. Let me court you properly, as you deserve. Let me show the world that Eleanor Ashford is alive, and that she is the woman I intend to marry. The woman you intend to marry, if you will have me. If you can forgive me for being blind for so long, for wasting months when I could have been telling you how I felt. If you can tolerate a man who is stubborn and difficult and has a great deal to learn about how to love someone properly. I think, I said slowly, that I could tolerate such a man. I think I could even love him, even though he is arrogant. Even though he is arrogant, even though he cheats at chess. That remains a point of contention, I said, and I was smiling now, really smiling, for the first time in longer than I could remember. But I suppose I can overlook it. For now. He kissed me then, right there on the frozen moor, with the dawn breaking pink and gold around us, with my battered trunk sitting forgotten at our feet, with everything uncertain and impossible, and yet somehow perfect. He kissed me as if I were air, and he were drowning, as if I were light, and he had lived too long in darkness, as if I were home, and he had been wandering for years. When we finally broke apart, breathless and laughing and crying all at once, he lifted my trunk and placed it on his horse. "Come," he said, offering me his hand. "Let us go home." Home. Such a small word, carrying such enormous weight. I had not had a home since my father died. I had not believed I would ever have one again. I took his hand. The months that followed were not easy. Sebastian had been right to warn me that the world would talk. When he presented me to society as his intended bride, the scandal was immediate and vicious. A housemaid, they whispered. A ruined earl's daughter who had sunk so low as to scrub floors. The Duke has lost his mind. The Duke has been bewitched. The Duke is a fool and a disgrace. But Sebastian weathered the storm with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to everything else. He invited the most influential gossips to Ashworth Hall and proceeded to demonstrate, through sheer force of personality and the strategic deployment of his immense fortune, that anyone who wished to remain in his good graces would accept me as his future duchess. One by one, the critics fell silent. One by one, the doors that had been closed to me began to open. I was not naive enough to believe they truly accepted me. I knew that behind their polite smiles, many of them still looked at me and saw a fortune hunter, an adventuress, a woman who had somehow ensnared a duke through means they could not fathom. But I had learned to care very little about what society thought. I had Sebastian, and I had my dignity, and I had a future that only months ago would have seemed like a fever dream. The wedding took place in the chapel at Ashworth Hall on a summer evening, when the light was golden and the air was sweet with roses. I wore a gown of ivory silk that Sebastian had commissioned from the finest dressmaker in London, and I carried a bouquet of white flowers from the garden that I had begun to cultivate, the first of many changes I would make to transform this mausoleum into a home. My father would have been proud. I thought of him as I walked down the aisle, thought of all the lessons he had taught me, all the skills he had given me, the chess and the philosophy and the unshakable belief that my mind was my greatest asset. He had prepared me for this moment without knowing it, had armed me with everything I needed to survive my fall and to rise again. "I wish you could see me now," I whispered to him in my heart. "I wish you could meet the man I am marrying. I think you would like him. I think you would beat him at chess." Sebastian was waiting for me at the altar, and when I reached him, he took my hands in his and looked at me with those storm-gray eyes that had once seemed so cold and now seemed like the warmest things in the world. "I was terrified of this day," he murmured, low enough that only I could hear. "Terrified that you would come to your senses, that you would realize you could do better than a broken widower with a cold heart and a colder reputation." I squeezed his hands. "Your heart was never cold," I said. "It was only waiting. And as for your reputation, I intend to reform it completely. By the time I am finished with you, Sebastian Ashworth, the world will know you as the man I know. The man who plays chess at midnight and reads poetry in secret and loves with a ferocity that would terrify them if they understood it. I am not sure I want to be understood by them. Then you shall be understood by me, and that will be enough. The ceremony was brief, and the reception was intimate, attended only by those few members of society who had proven themselves worthy of our trust. When it was over, when the guests had departed and the servants had retired, Sebastian led me to the library. The chess table was waiting, the pieces arranged in their starting positions. "I thought we might have one more game," he said, "as husband and wife." I took my seat across from him, my wedding gown pooling around me like a cloud. "I should warn you," I said. "I have been practicing." "So have I." His eyes glittered with challenge. "And I intend to win. You always intend to win. And yet, here I am. Checkmate. The game is not over yet, my love." He was right. The game was not over. The game had barely begun. But as I moved my first piece, as I felt the familiar thrill of strategy and anticipation, as I looked across the board at the man I loved, I knew that whatever the outcome, I had already won. We played late into the night, that first night of our marriage, our game punctuated by laughter and conversation and stolen kisses. He beat me twice. I beat him 3 times. We called the final game a draw, both of us too tired to continue, both of us unwilling to end this perfect evening with anything as definitive as victory or defeat. "Come to bed," he said finally, rising from his chair and offering me his hand. "We have the rest of our lives to determine who is the superior player." I took his hand. I always would. The rest of our lives. Such a vast expanse of time, stretching out before us like an unexplored country. There would be challenges ahead, I knew. There would be battles to fight and obstacles to overcome and moments when the world would try to tear us apart. But we would face them together, this brilliant, complicated, impossible man and I. We would face them as partners, as equals, as 2 minds that had recognized in each other something rare and precious. I had come to Ashworth Hall as a ghost, a woman erased by circumstance and necessity. I had hidden myself in the shadows, convinced that I would never be seen again, never be known again, never be loved again. But Sebastian had found me there, in the darkness, and he had drawn me back into the light. That first night, as I lay in his arms, I thought about all the paths that had led me to this moment. The fall that had seemed like an ending, but was actually a beginning. The chess game that had revealed me, the midnight conversations that had healed us both, the courage it had taken to let him in, and the greater courage it had taken to let him love me. I thought about my father, and I hoped he was at peace. I thought about my mother, and I imagined her smiling down at me from wherever she was. I thought about the girl I had been and the woman I had become, and I felt something that I had not felt in years. Whole. My name is Eleanor Catherine Ashworth, Duchess of Ashworth, and I am writing this account in the library where everything changed. Outside, the moors are covered in snow, and my husband is playing chess with our son, a boy of 7 who has inherited his father's brilliant mind, and, I am told, my stubborn determination to win. I can hear them laughing through the door, Sebastian's deep voice mingling with Edward's delighted giggles, and the sound fills me with a joy so profound that I sometimes cannot believe it is real. We named him for Sebastian's father, as he had wanted to name the child he lost. But this Edward is alive and healthy and full of wonder, and every time I look at him, I see proof that the universe is not entirely indifferent to our suffering, that sometimes, out of great loss, something beautiful can grow. There is a daughter, too. Charlotte, we call her, after my mother. She is 4 years old and already shows signs of the same fierce intelligence that has defined both her parents. She demands stories at bedtime and insists on accompanying me to the garden, where she names each rose as if they were her personal friends. Sebastian spoils her outrageously, a fact that he denies with a straight face, even as he agrees to her every whim. We have been married for 8 years now. 8 years of chess games and debates and quiet evenings by the fire. 8 years of learning each other, forgiving each other, growing together in ways I never imagined possible. The cold Duke is a distant memory now, a character in a story that no one quite believes. In his place is simply Sebastian, my husband, my partner, the man who saw me when I was invisible and loved me before I knew I could be loved. I still play chess. We both do. The board remains in its place of honor by the library window, the same ebony and ivory pieces that witnessed our first game all those years ago. Sometimes Sebastian wins, sometimes I win. More often now we call draws. Both of us too interested in the conversation to care about the outcome. Checkmate, I had said that first night, and I had meant it as a declaration of victory. But I understand now that I had it wrong. The checkmate was not mine. It was his. He had trapped me that night, not with strategy or force, but with something far more powerful. He had trapped me with the promise of being seen, being known, being loved. And I had let him. I have no regrets. Not about the path I walked, not about the sacrifices I made, not about any of it. Every hardship led me here, to this library, to this life, to these children and this husband and this home that I have built from the ruins of what I lost. I would not change a single moment, not even the darkest ones, because they made me who I am. They made this possible. Last night, as we were preparing for bed, Sebastian asked me a question that he has asked before, a question that has become something of a ritual between us. "Do you remember," he said, "what you were thinking that first night, when you moved my bishop?" I smiled, settling into his arms as I always do. "I was thinking that you were making a mistake," I said. "I was thinking that I could see something you could not. I was thinking that if I could just show you, just for a moment, then maybe you would understand." Understand what? That I was there, that I existed, that I was more than a shadow in the corner of your vision. He pulled me closer, his lips brushing my temple. "I understand now," he murmured. "I understand everything." And he did. After all these years, after all we have been through, he truly did. "Checkmate," I whispered. He laughed softly in the darkness. "Indeed, my love. Indeed. In the morning, our children will come tumbling into our bed, demanding breakfast and attention and the 1,000 small kindnesses that parents owe their young. Sebastian will complain, as he always does, even as he gathers them both into his arms and covers them with kisses. I will watch them, my family, and I will feel that same overwhelming gratitude that catches me off guard sometimes, that reminds me how close I came to losing everything, how easily this life could have been something else entirely. But it is not something else. It is this. It is exactly, perfectly, wonderfully this. My name is Eleanor Ashworth. I was once a ghost, invisible and forgotten. But I learned something important in the darkness of those years. I learned that invisibility is a choice, that we can step out of the shadows whenever we are ready, that love, true love, is not found in grand gestures or fairy tale rescues, but in the quiet moments between two people who have chosen to see each other, to know each other, to stay. Sebastian chose to see me. I chose to let him. And from that choice, from that one decision to step into the light, everything else followed. "Checkmate," I had said. And he had looked at the board and frozen. But what neither of us knew then, what we could not have known, was that the game was only beginning. That the true checkmate was not a single move, but a lifetime of moves, a partnership of minds and hearts, a love story written in the language of pawns and knights and queens. I am the queen now, not because he made me so, but because I made myself so, because I refused to be invisible, because I dared to move when everything told me to stay still, because I saw an opening and I took it, and in doing so, I changed everything. This is my story, our story. The story of a housemaid and a duke, a chess game and a revelation, a love that should have been impossible, but turned out to be the most real thing either of us had ever known. It ends here, with snow falling outside and laughter echoing through the halls and a lifetime of happiness stretching out before us. But it also never ends, not really, because love like ours does not have a final move. Love like ours is eternal, a game that goes on forever, a checkmate that is also a beginning. I set down my pen now. Sebastian is calling me, something about our son having discovered a new chess strategy that he insists I must see immediately. I will go to them, to my family, to the life I never dared to dream of. But first, a moment of silence, a moment of gratitude. A moment to remember the girl I was, standing in a cold library, reaching for a chess piece with trembling hands. That girl could not have imagined this, but she hoped for it in her secret heart. She hoped for something exactly like this. And sometimes, against all odds, hope is enough. It was certainly enough for me.